If someone told you that the greatest heartbreak of your life would begin with a shared desk in the 3rd grade, would you believe them? Because that's exactly how it started for Emily Carter. She didn't know it then, how could she? She was just a sharp-tongued, messy-haired girl who didn't fit into the typical mold. She had a boyish haircut, a quick temper, and a laugh that always erupted too loud during math class. But there was one person who never seemed bothered by her rough edges: Ethan Myers. Ethan was the son of a retired army officer, a kid who carried an air of discipline in the way he tied his shoelaces and sat up straight in class, but still couldn't keep his fingernails clean to save his life. They were seated next to each other by accident or fate, depending on how you look at it. For 5 years, they shared gum wrappers, cheat sheets, and whispered secrets behind textbooks. For 5 years, they fought like enemies and bonded like soulmates without ever naming it love. Every day after school, they walked the same path home through the quiet streets of Maple Hollow, parting ways at the first intersection. That's where they'd always pause. Sometimes just for a moment, sometimes for longer. A promise hung in the air: see you tomorrow. It wasn't grand. It wasn't romantic, but it was everything. Their parents grew close to Friday dinners, Sunday picnics, holidays spent rotating between the Carters' old farmhouse and the Myers' porch. It was as if the universe was stitching two lives together thread by thread, long before Emily or Ethan understood what any of it meant. And yet ... as perfect as that sounds, let me tell you something nobody likes to say out loud. The people we love the most are also the ones most capable of breaking us beyond repair. You see, when you grow up side by side with someone, when they know how you looked with braces, or that you used to cry every time your brother teased you, there's a kind of dangerous intimacy in that. One that goes so deep, you don't even know where you end and they begin. Emily didn't fall in love with Ethan the way novels romanticize it. There were no butterflies or slow-motion glances across a crowded room. She fell in love the day he stood in the rain outside her front door, drenched and furious, holding the test paper she had thrown away because she failed. He was 11, she was 10. "You're not allowed to give up," he yelled through shivering lips. "You're smarter than this. I know you are." That moment branded itself into her memory, but life has a twisted sense of humor. Because sometimes, the one person who sees the brightest parts of you will also be the one who unknowingly walks you toward your darkest days. Years passed, and so did Season's middle school, high school, college applications, but Ethan and Emily. They stayed together through it all, not romantically. Not yet, just ... together. Like oxygen and lungs, inseparable, unnoticed, essential. They both got into universities in Boston. They rented an apartment near the Charles River, a tiny space with bad plumbing and a view of dumpsters. But they didn't care. They were free, young, full of dreams, and the kind of naive confidence that makes you believe nothing can touch you. And for a while, nothing did, but I want you to hold on to one thought, because it will matter more than anything else in this story. The longer you trust someone without question, the harder it is to believe they could ever lie. That kind of trust is beautiful, but it's also dangerous. And as Emily would come to find out, it was a blade with two edges. Now, before we move on to what happened next, I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that their absence would feel more painful than betrayal? Have you ever wondered what it would cost you if one day they simply stopped being who you thought they were? Because that's where this story is headed. And trust me, it only gets harder from here. If this story speaks to something in your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support gives us the strength to keep bringing you stories that matter, stories that hurt, heal, and stay with you. Thought-provoking question, comment below. If your partner started acting distant and secretive for weeks, A. Would you confront them immediately, even if you risk being wrong? B. Would you wait in silence, hoping they'll open up when they're ready? Comment or be below. Let's talk about it. Marriage has a strange way of magnifying the silent spaces between words. The gaps between sentences grow wider, the pauses last longer. You don't notice it right away, no one does. You think you're just tired or busy or distracted. But sometimes those quiet spaces are grief dressed in disguise. Emily and Ethan married on a warm spring afternoon in New Hampshire. It was simple, quiet, intentional, just the way they wanted. There were no extravagant flower walls, no dramatic champagne toasts, just the people who had walked with them through life's earliest seasons. Emily wore a soft, flowing summer dress. Ethan, a rolled-up shirt with suspenders and that familiar smirk he'd worn since childhood. They stood beneath the old willow tree in Ethan's parents' backyard, exchanged vows they wrote themselves, and released two white doves into the cloudless sky. For a while, it felt like the kind of beginning that no ending could touch. They moved into a modest townhouse near the city. Work came next. Long hours, commutes, promotions. Ethan worked with a civil engineering firm on sustainable infrastructure. Emily, ever the detail-driven mind, specialized in systems optimization. They were both good at what they did, but that was never the dream. The dream had soft feet running across hardwood floors. The dream had fingerprints smudged on the fridge and sleepy-eyed cartoons on Saturday mornings. Emily held onto that vision with a quiet desperation, nurturing it in the margins of her day while folding laundry, while brushing her teeth, while staring out of car windows in traffic. But month after month, test after test, visit after visit to the cold, clinical spaces of fertility specialists, the reality began to whisper what her heart feared most. That dream was not coming. There is a unique ache that settles into a woman's bones when her body denies her the one thing she's biologically told she should do. It's a hollow kind of grief, like mourning someone who was never born, yet always expected. Emily didn't cry in front of Ethan the first time the doctor said infertility. She nodded. She asked questions. She scheduled another appointment. But that night, when he fell asleep, she slipped into the bathroom, turned on the faucet to drown the sound, and broke down in silence. Ethan was her anchor through it all. He never flinched, not once. When she threw away the nursery catalogues in a fit of anger, he picked them up and tucked them away, not out of denial, but out of respect. When her voice cracked during family gatherings where babies crawled under tables, he held her hand beneath the tablecloth without a word. He never asked her to move on. He never said everything happens for a reason. He simply stayed. And yet, the staying came with its own weight. Emily began to notice that her pain was shifting shape. It no longer just mourned the absence of a child. It began to question her worth as a woman, as a wife. What if Ethan stayed because it was easier than leaving? What if the loyalty he showed wasn't love, but obligation? What if deep down he regretted the life they were building? These weren't accusations she voiced aloud, but thoughts that haunted her in quiet moments. She'd look at him across the dinner table, watching the lines of fatigue on his face, and wonder if it was disappointment he was hiding. She sometimes picked fights about groceries, laundry, forgotten texts just to see if he'd snap. He never did, but that only made her feel guiltier. The silence between them became louder. Friends around them kept growing. Families. Baby showers, ultrasound photos, gender reveal parties. Emily would smile through every one of them, gift trapped presents with perfectly tied bows, and retreat home to cry in the shower. She didn't resent anyone, but she hated the calendar. Every new month felt like a mockery of her hopes. On Emily's 30th birthday, Ethan surprised her with dinner at a rustic, candlelit restaurant by the lake. The food was perfect, the wine smooth, and the ambience exactly what she usually adored. But she couldn't shake the tightness in her chest. As he reached across the table to hold her hand, she caught her reflection in the window behind him. There she was, a woman with a successful career, a loving husband, and a life that looked enviable from the outside, yet all she could feel was absence. Just as she was finding the courage to speak, her phone buzzed. It was Whitney, a childhood friend, now heavily pregnant with twins. "Happy birthday," Whitney chirped, her voice buzzing with excitement. "I just had another ultrasound. Can you believe it? 2 healthy babies, twins." Emily froze, the smile on her face cracked just slightly as she excused herself to take the call outside. Her hands trembled. She tried to summon joy, tried to sound thrilled, but her voice betrayed her with an unnatural tightness. Whitney didn't notice, or if she did, she didn't care. She went on and on, until finally Emily murmured, "That's wonderful, Whit. Really, I'm happy for you." She hung up, stared out at the dark lake, and let her tears fall for just 1 minute before returning to the table, slipping her mask back on. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Emily asked Ethan a question that had been lingering for months. "If you had known that I couldn't have children, would you have still married me?" There was a beat. A pause, not of hesitation, but of pain. Ethan turned to her and said, "Emily, I didn't marry you to have children. I married you because I can't imagine my life without you. If children came, they'd be a gift, but you are the reason I believe in anything at all." And for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe him. But that's the thing about grief, it doesn't vanish with a single conversation. It settles in, it adapts, it waits. Emily found herself chasing purpose in her work, pouring into her career as if promotions could fill the void. But no accolade or award could substitute the moment she longed for, to be called mum. And somewhere in that season of coping and surviving, a question began to grow in the dark. If love is strong enough to endure the absence of a dream, what happens when one person starts needing a new one? And what if they find it, without telling the other? That question would come back to haunt Emily in ways she never saw coming, and that is where we'll go next. There's something terrifying about not knowing when a relationship begins to unravel. It rarely happens in a single moment. It doesn't scream. It whispers, quiet shifts, small habits, little lies told too easily, and truths held too tightly. And in most marriages, the unraveling doesn't begin with betrayal, it begins with doubt. For Emily, the doubt came on quietly like fog seeping in beneath a closed door. At first, it was just Ethan coming home later than usual. A few minutes past dinner, then an hour, then past midnight. Each time, there was a reason. An urgent deadline, a client emergency, team meetings that drag. And at first, she believed it all. Why wouldn't she? He had never given her reason not to, but something in his tone changed. Something in the way he'd avoid her eyes when he walked through the door, how he'd rush straight to the shower, then slip into bed without touching her, his back turned just enough to feel like a wall. He kissed her forehead, he said he loved her. But somehow, it didn't land. She tried not to overthink. She tried to blame it on stress, on the cyclical burnout that comes with ambitious careers and adult responsibility. But then, one night, she drove past Ethan's office after leaving a late meeting of her own. It was almost 9:30 p.m. The parking lot was empty. Pitch black, no sign of his car, no sign of him. Still, when he came home an hour later, hair damp, sleeves rolled, he told her he'd been at work the whole evening. And Emily smiled. She didn't ask, she didn't accuse. She simply said, "You look tired," then turned over and stared into the darkness while her stomach twisted with something she couldn't name. It was worse than anger. It was a growing sense that someone was wedging its way between them, and she didn't know how to reach him anymore. The first person she confided in wasn't a friend or even her therapist, it was her mother. Over tea in the kitchen one morning, her hands wrapped tightly around a steaming mug, Emily broke the silence. "Do you think Ethan could be hiding something from me?" Her mother, quiet at first, studied her with the kind of careful concern only a mother can give. "That depends," she said. "Are you asking because you have reason to believe he is, or because you're scared he might be?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence was loud enough. Her mother leaned in. "Sweetheart, love doesn't erase the possibility of deception. It only makes it hurt more when it shows up. But before you go chasing ghosts, make sure you're not being haunted by your own fears." She wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that her wounds from infertility weren't making her paranoid. But the signs kept multiplying. Late-night texts he wouldn't let her see. A receipt for groceries she never found. A voice message she overheard, someone reminding him not to forget milk and eggs left at 1 a.m. And then there was the child. Not in a dream, not in a rumor, in her living room. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend, a getaway to the lake house to clear her head. Ethan had told her he'd be stuck in meetings all weekend. That he'd join her Monday, maybe Tuesday. She had believed him because believing was easier than confronting the weight in her chest. But when she pulled into the gravel driveway, she saw it, his car, parked in the shade like it had been there for days. At first, she thought it might be someone else's, maybe a neighbor's, maybe a mistake. But her key turned the lock, the door opened. And in the living room, curled up under a blanket, was a child. A little boy, no more than 3, rubbing his eyes, blinking into the light. And then he said it, "Daddy." Emily's breath left her body like a punch to the lungs. She stood frozen, heartbeat thundering in her ears, unable to process what she was seeing, what she was hearing. Then came Ethan, stumbling down the hallway, startled, barefoot, looking just as stunned to see her as she was to see him. Emily, wait, just listen. She didn't wait. She didn't scream. She walked past him like a ghost and into the kitchen, opened the cabinet, pulled out a glass, and dropped it on the floor. Not intentionally, her hands were shaking too hard. The shatter echoed through the room. He followed her, tried to speak. She couldn't hear him over the roaring in her ears. "Who is he?" she finally asked, her voice low. "Is he yours?" Ethan shook his head. No, he's not my son." But the boy called him Daddy. The boy knew him, trusted him, was clinging to his shirt as if he'd done it 100 times before. "He's Nathan's son," Ethan said softly. Nathan had an affair years ago. The mother couldn't keep him. His aunt was raising him, but couldn't anymore. I found her at a diner one night. She was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. I brought him here." Emily stared at him, her eyes blank. "And you didn't think to tell me, your wife? You've been sneaking around behind my back, not for an affair, but to raise someone else's child." "I wanted to protect you," he said. "You've been hurting for so long, and I didn't know if this would make things better or worse. So you made the decision for me," she whispered. He looked down, said nothing. And in that silence, something inside Emily cracked, not from betrayal, not from anger, but from the sheer weight of being excluded from a part of her husband's life so enormous it had its own heartbeat. Trust is not only about fidelity, it's about presence, inclusion, sharing the weight of choices, not shielding someone from them. That night, she packed a small bag. She didn't say much. Just, "If you want to talk, really talk, you know where to find me. But until then, I need space," and she walked out. Not because she didn't love him, but because she couldn't love him in the dark. Because secrets, even those born from good intentions, become poison when kept too long. And Ethan had waited too long. What he didn't know was that the moment she closed the door behind her, something far more dangerous than heartbreak had begun to bloom inside Emily. A loss of trust, and once that's gone, love has nothing left to stand on. There's a kind of heaviness that lingers in a marriage when the truth has yet to be spoken. It doesn't shout or break doors, it simply rests in the air like dust, settling into the corners of every conversation, dulling even the kindest gestures with a quiet weight. Emily and Ethan had reached that point where silence wasn't peaceful anymore, just the absence of honesty. It had been weeks since she left the lake house. Weeks of unanswered texts, of calls that rang out into voicemail. Ethan had respected her space, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps because he knew there was nothing left to say that could undo what had been done. Emily, meanwhile, hadn't spoken to anyone about what she'd discovered, not her mother, not her closest friend. Because when betrayal comes not in the form of infidelity, but in the form of secrecy for your own good, it becomes a different kind of hurt. One that's harder to explain, harder to heal. Ethan sent her one message, just one. It read, "When you're ready to hear everything, I'll be here. No more hiding." It took her 13 days to reply. "Tomorrow, 6 p.m, our place." And so they met again, two people who once shared a bed, a home, and a dream of raising a child, now sitting across from one another at the kitchen table, separated by more than just wood and air. Ethan looked older, not in a physical sense. His face hadn't changed much, but there was a kind of weariness in his eyes, a softness that hadn't been there before. Emily had seen him cry only once before, the night the doctor told them they couldn't conceive. But now, his sorrow was quiet, worn like a garment that had become too familiar to feel. He didn't begin with excuses, he didn't fumble with small talk. He simply said, "I need to tell you everything. Even the part that might make you hate me," and she nodded. Ethan leaned back, inhaled deeply, and began. The child Logan was not Nathan's son, he was Ethan's. Years ago, during one of the many breaks they took after fertility treatments drained the life out of their marriage, Ethan made a mistake. A woman named Claire. It wasn't love, it wasn't even lust, it was escape. A one-night search for something to numb the helplessness he felt as he watched Emily suffer month after month, miscarriage after failed round of IVF, growing thinner not just in body but in spirit. He had intended never to speak of it again. Claire had left town shortly after. No contact, no drama. He thought it was over. Until 5 months ago, that was when she showed up at his office, pale, angry, desperate, with a toddler on her hip and a manila envelope in her hand. She said she had tried to raise him on her own. That she didn't want anything, no money, no involvement. But her health had deteriorated, she was sick. And if something happened to her, there would be no one to care for Logan. Ethan had taken the envelope, he had opened it. Inside was a DNA report, a letter, and a photograph of Logan sleeping. He didn't deny it. The boy had his eyes, his chin. Even the same crooked smile he had when he was little. Emily sat frozen, not crying, not breathing. Just listening. I brought him to the lake house, Ethan continued. It was the only place where I could think clearly, where no one would ask questions. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to destroy everything we built, but I also couldn't turn away from him. Not after knowing, not after seeing him. Emily finally spoke. Her voice was quieter than a whisper. Why didn't you tell me the moment he appeared? Because I was ashamed, Ethan said. Ashamed that in the middle of our darkest hour, I had done something that could hurt you even more. I kept hoping I could fix it, somehow solve it quietly, maybe even never let you find out. But I did, she said. I found out. And that's when Ethan broke. I hate myself for it, he said. Every night, I thought about telling you. Every time I looked at him and saw myself, I thought of how you would look at me if you knew. And every time I saw you hurting, I knew that the truth would kill what little peace you still had left. Emily closed her eyes. So you lied to protect me from a truth I had every right to know. Yes. There was a long pause. You always promised we'd face everything together, she said. That even if the world turned upside down, we'd stand on the same side. But when it really happened, when life finally threw us the cruelest curveball, you stood alone. You faced it without me. You became a father without me. Ethan's eyes welled. I know. The kitchen fell silent. A silence not of tension, but of reckoning. I'm not angry because you had a child, Emily said. I'm broken because you decided I didn't deserve to be part of the decision, that you didn't trust me with your shame, that you chose to carry it alone, even when I would have carried it with you. He looked down. I didn't want to break you. You broke me anyway. The words hung between them, soft and lethal. She stood slowly, her hand brushing the table, fingers trembling. I don't know what comes next, she said. I don't know if we can fix this. But if there's one thing I'm certain of, it's this: you don't get to decide for both of us ever again. Not when it comes to truth, not when it comes to consequences. Ethan nodded, not in agreement, but in surrender. I'll do whatever it takes, he said, even if it's letting you go. Emily didn't answer. She just walked to the door, hand on the knob, and paused. I'm not walking out forever, she said. But I am walking out until I can look at you without seeing everything you hid. And then she left, not with hatred, not with vengeance, but with the aching clarity of a woman who had finally heard the truth and realized that sometimes it doesn't set you free. Sometimes it simply shows you who you are and who you can no longer be with. There are some kinds of grief that never really end. They soften, perhaps, they dull around the edges. But they never disappear. Emily knew this intimately. The loss of what could have been, the betrayal of what should have been, and the haunting ache of what never will, all of it had carved itself into her. And yet, somehow, she kept moving forward. 6 months had passed since that night in the kitchen when Ethan told her the truth. Since then, life had not followed any grand plan of closure or redemption. Healing doesn't come in sweeping cinematic moments. It comes in silence, in loneliness, in the quiet decision to keep breathing even when your chest feels hollow. She had spent the first few weeks in a friend's guest room, then moved into a small rental in a nearby town. It was nothing like the home she and Ethan built together, but it was hers. It smelled like lavender and old books. It had one window that let in the morning light. And most importantly, it gave her space. Ethan, true to his word, didn't try to chase her. He sent updates about Logan, small things. Logan's first bike ride, his favorite bedtime story. How he liked his toast cut diagonally, nothing dramatic. No guilt, just a breadcrumb trail of a boy's life, an unspoken invitation to witness, from a distance. And Emily watched. From afar at first, then slowly closer, a phone call here. A visit to the park, pretending to just pass by. Until one day, she sat beside Logan on the swings, and he looked up at her with the same crooked smile as his father's. "Are you my aunt or something?" he asked innocently. She laughed, though her chest tightened. "Something like that," she whispered. There was no script for what followed, no right or wrong moves. Just a series of small, brave steps. She started seeing Logan once a week. They baked cookies, went to museums, painted handprints on old pillowcases. He had her heart before she even realized it was available again. But the real shift came the day Claire, his biological mother, passed away quietly in hospice. She had left a single letter behind, addressed to Emily. It read, "You don't know me, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I've seen the way you look at him, even when you think no one's watching. You don't have to be his mother, but if you choose to be, I'll die in peace knowing he's loved." Emily folded the letter and cried for a woman she never met. A woman who had made mistakes, yes, but who had also left behind a child whose entire future now stood in her hands. That night, she called Ethan. "I want to help raise him," she said. He didn't speak for a long moment. "Are you sure?" he finally asked, his voice careful, almost afraid to believe. "No," she replied honestly, "but I'm willing." They didn't fall back into old patterns. There was no sudden romantic reunion, no promises of forever. Just the slow, steady process of building something new. Ethan moved closer. They coordinated Logan's school schedule. Shared weekends, attended parent-teacher conferences. And somewhere along the way, in the cracks of shared responsibility and quiet dinners, something unspoken began to mend. Not the marriage they had before it was gone, buried beneath years of infertility, secrets, and unspoken hurt. But something else, something more honest, grounded, raw. One evening, as Emily tucked Logan into bed, he asked, "Why don't I have a mom like the other kids?" Her throat caught, but she didn't flinch. "You did," she said gently. "She loved you very much. And now you have two people who will love you every day, in every way they know how." He smiled sleepily, curling into her arm. "Can I call you Mom too?" She blinked, a tear slipping free. "Only if you want to." He nodded and fell asleep with her hand in his. That was the moment she knew family wasn't always something you were born into. Sometimes it was something you chose to build, deliberately, tenderly, from the ashes of what once burned. Ethan and Emily never officially remarried. They didn't need to. Their commitment was no longer rooted in romance, but in respect, growth, and shared love for a boy who had changed both their lives. Love, in its most powerful form, had reshaped itself not through grand gestures, but through presence. Through forgiveness, through showing up. And in that quiet, ordinary home, filled with Lego bricks and mismatched mugs, a new family emerged. Not perfect, not conventional, but real. And real, in the end, was enough. In the quiet aftermath of betrayal, in the stillness that follows a storm of lies and shattered dreams, what remains is not just the pain but the choice of what to do with it. Emily's story is not just about broken trust or unexpected motherhood. It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to rebuild, even when everything familiar has turned to ash. At its core, it's about grace, the grace to walk away, the grace to return, and the grace to begin again without needing to erase the past. In marriage and in life, we often carry unspoken expectations. We expect love to follow a script, loyalty to be unshakable, and happiness to arrive on cue. But reality is far messier. People fail each other. Life delivers wounds no one signed up for. And yet, amidst all of it, there exists the incredible human ability to choose love anyway, not the fairy tale kind, but the kind that shows up in courtrooms, hospital rooms, and bedrooms filled with silent grief. Ethan's confession wasn't just an admission of guilt, it was a hand extended in vulnerability. And Emily's decision to engage with that truth rather than flee or retaliate was an act of courage many never reach. It wasn't easy, it wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and that is where transformation begins. Too often we believe forgiveness must mean forgetting, or that moving forward means everything has to return to the way it was. Emily teaches us something different. Sometimes, the future isn't about reclaiming the past, it's about redefining what love, family, and healing look like today. It's about choosing connection over resentment, growth over pride, and showing up even when it hurts. This story also challenges us to reconsider what makes a family. Blood may connect us, but love and responsibility bind us. Emily didn't give birth to Logan, but in the slow and steady steps she took, sharing stories, wiping tears, making sandwiches, she became a mother. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. In a world so quick to judge and so eager for revenge, perhaps the greatest rebellion is tenderness, choosing to stay soft, to stay hopeful, to rebuild without bitterness. Emily's story is one of ashes, yes, but also of rebirth. And it quietly asks us, what will you do with your pain? Will you let it poison you, or will you let it shape you into something deeper, more resilient, more human? A deep life lesson. The lesson is this: healing doesn't require forgetting. Love doesn't require perfection, and sometimes the strongest relationships are born not from ease, but from endurance. Life will test us, often in unfair and deeply painful ways. But our response, how we choose to act, love, forgive, or walk away, defines who we become. Apply this lesson by pausing in your own life to ask, who have I judged too harshly? Where have I closed a door that could still be mended? And am I holding on to anger not because it helps me, but because I'm afraid of what healing might require? Start small, send a message, have a conversation. Rebuild not to erase the pain, but to create something better from it. A simple question for you: if someone deeply hurt you, but sincerely tried to make it right, would you give them a second chance, or would you protect yourself by walking away for good? Please comment your answer below, or and tell us why. Your perspective might help someone else going through something similar. And if this story moved you, or made you reflect even a little, please consider subscribing to this channel. If you feel called to, you can also donate any amount to support this work. I'm not young anymore, but I believe in using the time I have left to do something meaningful, sharing real stories that heal, inspire, and connect us. Your support helps me keep going. Thank you for being here.